Welcome. Today we're doing a deep dive into a case that, well, it's haunted the public consciousness for almost 3 decades now. The
Mm.
killing of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. Mentioning her name, it just opens up this flood of, conflicting information, so much speculation, and questions that still don't have answers about that Christmas night in 1996. We're going to carefully go through the source material provided today, lay out what's actually known from the records, look at the critical mistakes made early on, and see where things stand now.
Yes, and our task today is, frankly, quite challenging. The evidence in this case is just riddled with conflict, and there were significant procedural problems right from the start. We need to acknowledge that many of the core facts we'll discuss are used to support two completely opposite conclusions. Was it a family member, or was it an unknown intruder? So our goal is to guide you strictly through the details and the sources, the forensics, the investigation failures, the competing theories. And throughout, it's vital we maintain deep respect and sympathy for JonBenét herself. She was only 6 years old.
The basic timeline, it sounds simple, but the details are anything but. JonBenét was killed in her home in Boulder, Colorado, December 25th, 1996. Her body wasn't found right away. It was about 7 hours after she was reported missing, hidden away down in the basement. And that 7-hour window, as we'll see, it became this kind of vacuum that really compromised the entire investigation from ever reaching a clear conclusion.
Let's start with JonBenét herself, her background. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey, born August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. Her family was quite prominent in Boulder. Her father, JonBenét Ramsey, was president of Access Graphics, a computer software company. Her mother, Patricia Patsy Ramsey, a former Miss West Virginia. And JonBenét had an older brother, Burke, plus 3 older half-siblings from John's previous marriage.
Right after the murder, the media focus became incredibly intense on one particular aspect of her life. Her involvement in child beauty pageants. She was only 6, but she'd already won titles like Little Miss Colorado, National Tiny Miss Beauty. And this brought a huge amount of attention, often quite critical, especially towards her mother, Patsy, often painted as this stereotypical pageant mother. There was this immediate implication, really pushed by the media frenzy, that somehow this public, very image-focused lifestyle was connected to the tragedy.
Now, turning to the physical evidence, the autopsy details are, well, they're disturbing, and they present the first major forensic clash. The official report ruled it a homicide. The cause of death was listed as asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma.
So she was strangled, but she also had a severe skull fracture.
Exactly. That combination, blunt force trauma and strangulation, it suggests either a chaotic struggle or, maybe more chillingly, a sort of deliberate multi-step killing.
And that combination is key, isn't it? Because it connects directly to the weapon used for the strangulation. It was a garrote, a very specific kind of makeshift weapon found tied around her neck. A garrote needs a handle to tighten it, which implies, a certain level of planning and effort. It's not just a spontaneous act.
Precisely. And this garrote was very specific. It was made from a length of nylon cord and the broken handle of a paintbrush. Now, the paintbrush detail is central to the staging theory. Investigators found the top part, the bristle end of paintbrush, in Patsy's art supplies inside the house. But the bottom third of the handle, the part likely used as a lever to tighten the cord, that crucial piece was never found, despite really extensive searches of the home.
Okay, so we have a weapon clearly made from things found in the home, but the key functional part of it is missing, gone. That tension right there, the domestic source versus the missing piece, it just adds immediately to the confusion. And beyond the head and neck trauma, there were also things suggesting sexual assault, right? Though I understand conventional rape was ruled out.
That's correct. The autopsy did note a vaginal injury. And in a particularly upsetting detail, the evidence suggested that the paintbrush handle, or maybe the cord itself, was also used in that assault. The pathologist also noted that her vaginal area seemed to have been wiped with a cloth.
Suggesting an attempt to clean up, to destroy evidence.
Yes, suggesting a calculated effort by the perpetrator to remove forensic traces before leaving the scene.
Let's shift to another really unusual forensic detail, something related to the timing, the contents of her stomach. The autopsy found, and I'm quoting here, vegetable or fruit material which may represent pineapple, eaten shortly before she died, maybe within an hour or two.
Right, and that becomes incredibly significant when you look at the crime scene photos and what the family said about that night. Sources mention a photo taken the day her body was found, showing a bowl of pineapple with a spoon in it, just sitting on the kitchen table. And Patsy's fingerprints were found on that bowl.
Okay, but didn't the parents say they didn't give her any pineapple?
Exactly. When questioned, both John and Patsy said they didn't recall feeding JonBenét pineapple that night, or even putting that bowl out.
Wow. So that creates this direct link between the family, the time frame of the murder, and this item just sitting out in the kitchen unexplained. If they didn't give her the pineapple, who did? And why wouldn't they remember it, especially with Patsy's prints right there on the bowl? This detail really feeds that staging theory, doesn't it? The idea the family might have been trying to control the narrative, leaving out details that place them, or maybe someone else in the family of JonBenét right before she was killed. That simple bowl of fruit is a major inconsistency in their account.
Now, the immediate response to JonBenét's disappearance and how the crime scene was handled, well, it arguably set the course for the entire investigation and led to controversies that are still debated today. This part of the story is really defined by investigative mistakes and misjudgments.
It all starts with that ransom note. Patsy Ramsey calls 911 at 5:52 a.m. Mountain Time. She reports finding this long, handwritten note, 2.5 pages on the kitchen staircase, demanding $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. And that call itself, it immediately went against the note's very explicit instruction: do not contact authorities. Although, sources say she also called family and friends right after finding it, which she later attributed to panic.
The police arrived quickly, within 3 minutes, 2 officers. But their initial actions were, well, critically flawed. They did only a very cursory search of the house and reported finding no signs of forced entry.
But later investigations found unlocked doors and windows, right?
Yes. Later checks confirmed several potential entry points were unsecured. But the really huge failure point happened in the basement. Officer Rick French went down there, but he saw a particular door that was latched shut from the inside. He just assumed that ruled it out as an exit for a kidnapper. JonBenét's body was later found behind that very door.
So that assumption, that incorrect assumption, meant the actual primary crime scene wasn't secured, wasn't even discovered for hours.
Exactly. And because the police went in thinking kidnapping, not homicide, their whole approach was wrong from the start.
They only cordoned off JonBenét's bedroom, right?
Yes, just her bedroom. The rest of the house was treated like it wasn't part of a crime scene. This led to just disastrous contamination. Friends arrived, victim advocates, the family minister. People were coming and going all morning, and sources document visitors picking things up, moving items, even cleaning surfaces in the kitchen.
Oh, no. That would destroy evidence. Fingerprints, fibers.
Absolutely. Potentially destroying crucial trace evidence that might have belonged to the perpetrator, if there was one.
And the contamination just got worse, didn't it? Around 1:00 p.m.
It peaked, then yes. Detective Linda Arndt, who was the lead detective on scene, was waiting for contact from the supposed kidnappers, which never came. She then made a decision that's been incredibly criticized ever since. She asked John Ramsey and a family friend, Fleet White, to search the house themselves to see if they noticed anything amiss.
Asking a potential primary suspect to search the potential crime scene, that seems highly irregular.
It's almost unheard of in standard police procedure. It really shows how strong that initial kidnapping mindset was, overriding basic protocols.
And John Ramsey went straight to the basement.
He did. He opened that latched door the first officer had walked away from hours earlier, and he found his daughter's body.
And then he picked her up immediately.
Yes. He picked her up, carried her upstairs. He removed the duct tape that was over her mouth, loosened the cord around her neck.
Which would have disturbed everything on or around her body.
Exactly. Irrevocably disturbed critical forensic evidence. Any potential fibers, hairs, skin cells from an attacker that might have been on the tape or the cord, compromised. The scene processing team was dealing with severely altered evidence right from the moment of discovery.
Okay, let's talk about the ransom note itself. That note is so central to the theory that this was staged.
It really is. The length alone, 2.5 pages, immediately caught the FBI's attention. They told Boulder police it was highly unusual for a note that long to be written at the crime scene itself. Kidnapping notes are usually short, direct.
Right. Get to the point. But this one was different.
Very different. Verbose, almost theatrical. It had peculiar details. And significantly, it was written on a pen and notepad found inside the Ramsey house.
Suggesting the writer had time, felt comfortable, wasn't rushed.
Precisely. Suggesting they had ample time to compose this long text without immediate fear of being discovered.
And the amount demanded, $118,000. That wasn't a random round number.
No, very specific. And John Ramsey pointed out it was almost exactly the amount of his Christmas bonus from the previous year.
Which suggests inside knowledge, doesn't it? Either someone who knew his finances, like an employee.
That was one angle investigators explored, someone connected to Access Graphics. It's a key point for the intruder theory proponents.
Or For the staging theory, it suggests the author chose an amount they knew John could access quickly.
Right. Investigators also briefly looked into potential religious links like Psalm 118, but the inside knowledge angle seemed stronger to the police initially.
And the police really leaned into the staging idea because of the note, didn't they?
They did, strongly. The fact it was written on house materials, the unusual length, the theatrical tone, and crucially, the lack of fingerprints. Other than Patsy's prints, and prints from the authorities who handled it later, there were no unidentified prints on the note.
So someone spends all that time writing it but leaves no trace. That seems suspicious.
Very suspicious. Forensic pathologist Michael Baden, who consulted on the case, said he'd never seen a ransom note like it in 60 years. He didn't believe an outside stranger wrote it based on its complexity.
And the handwriting itself became a huge point of contention.
Fiercely disputed. A report from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, found indications that Patsy Ramsey might have been the author.
Indications, but not conclusive.
Right, falling short of a definitive match. But that finding definitely fueled the police focus on the parents. However, years later, in that libel case we mentioned, a federal court reviewed the handwriting evidence again. That judge concluded it was highly unlikely Patsy wrote it, citing 6 certified handwriting experts who disagreed with the CBI finding. The judge even criticized interference from unqualified, self-proclaimed experts who had muddied the waters.
So the official state investigation and a federal court reach opposite conclusions on the handwriting.
Exactly. It just shows how difficult that piece of evidence was to pin down definitively.
There was also something about the language used in the note. Echoing movies?
Yes, that's another strange aspect. The note used odd initialisms, lots of exclamation points, but also phrases that seemed to mirror dialogue from popular mid-90s movies.
Like which ones?
Sources mention films like Ruthless People, Ransom, Escape from New York, Speed, and even Dirty Harry. And the language wasn't just demanding money, it was intensely threatening, trying to exert complete control over the family.
And those threats were graphic, weren't they? Designed to terrify.
Absolutely. Let me quote directly from the note. It really shows the intent. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded.
Beheaded. That's extreme.
And it continues. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. Just absolute, total silence demanded.
Which Patsy immediately broke by calling 911. Adding another layer of confusion, was it a real kidnapping threat ignored in panic, or part of a panicked cover-up?
So given all this, the note originating in the house, the lack of forced entry signs initially found, the police naturally focused very heavily, almost exclusively, on John and Patsy right away. And this wasn't just a hunch. It was guided by statistics in child homicide cases.
Right. That's the standard procedural starting point often.
Yeah.
Retired FBI profiler Greg McCrary mentioned that a child homicide is typically committed by a family member or caregiver. He cited something like a 12-to-1 probability. So the Boulder police looked at the scene through that lens. They saw what they interpreted as staging, the weapon parts coming from inside the house, and then the Ramseys seemed reluctant to cooperate fully at first.
And the Ramseys' actions did amplify suspicion, certainly in the public eye. For about 4 months, they resisted formal police questioning unless it was on their terms. It got to the point where Colorado's governor, Bill Owens, publicly told them to quit hiding behind their attorneys.
But the Ramseys said they were reluctant because they felt the police had already decided they were guilty, right? That the police wouldn't seriously look for an intruder.
That was their stated position, yes. They feared the police had tunnel vision and wouldn't pursue any other leads, regardless of the evidence.
Within that family member theory, were there specific scenarios the police considered?
Yes. Based on the evidence, a couple emerged. One theory involved Patsy. It proposed that maybe in a sudden fit of rage, perhaps triggered by a bedwetting incident, which is sometimes cited in child abuse cases, she struck JonBenét. And then, possibly thinking the child was already dead from the head injury, she staged the strangulation and the ransom note to cover it up.
What's the counter-argument to that theory?
Well, sources note that Patsy didn't have any known history of violent or uncontrolled anger. And later, Burke Ramsey stated their parents never spanked them, let alone harmed them physically, which challenges that sudden rage idea.
And then there was the theory involving the brother, Burke. That got a lot of attention later on.
Yes, particularly after a 2016 CBS television program focused on it. That theory suggested that 9-year-old Burke might have hit his sister with a heavy object, maybe a flashlight, the supposed trigger, her stealing some pineapple from his bowl, which would, of course, tie back to that pineapple found in her stomach.
And in that scenario, the parents staged the crime scene afterwards to protect Burke.
That was the theory presented in the program. The parents supposedly created the whole kidnapping story, the note, everything to cover up what Burke had done accidentally or in anger.
But it's important context, isn't it, that Burke was interviewed several times early on?
Yes, crucial context. Burke was interviewed by investigators at least 3 times back then, including on video. A child psychologist reviewed the family dynamics and reported finding healthy, caring family relationships.
And the original police chief in the DA's office said they never considered him a suspect.
Correct. Both the initial Boulder police chief, Mark Beckner, and the DA's office later stated publicly that Burke was never formally considered a suspect during the initial investigation. So that 2016 theory was more of a retrospective and quite controversial take.
Eventually, the pressure led the DA to convene a grand jury, right, in 1998.
Yes. The district attorney's office felt there was enough evidence, enough probable cause, to put the case before a grand jury to consider charges against the Ramseys, even if they felt proving it beyond a reasonable doubt in a trial might be difficult.
And the grand jury did vote to indict the parents, though we didn't know that for years.
That's right. In 1999, the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on 2 counts of child abuse resulting in death. The specific wording was that they did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation that posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey.
So, not murder, but child abuse leading to death and enabling it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they were also accused of hindering the prosecution of whoever did kill her, implying the grand jury believed the parents covered up the crime, whether they directly committed the murder act or not.
But the district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, he refused to sign the indictment.
He did. He argued that while the evidence met the lower probable cause standard needed for a grand jury indictment, it wasn't strong enough to meet the much higher standard for a criminal trial, proofs beyond a reasonable doubt. He didn't think he could secure a conviction.
So the indictment never went forward, and the public didn't even know the grand jury had voted to indict until much later.
Not until 2013, 14 years later. Sealed court documents were released after a reporter and a press freedom group sued for access. By then, the statute of limitations on those specific child abuse charges from the indictment had expired back in 2002.
Okay, so that covers the main points of the family member theory and the grand jury. Let's switch to the other major theory, the intruder.
Right. This theory has always run parallel to the family theory, and it was championed by some investigators, including one very prominent detective who actually resigned over the direction the case was taking. The intruder theory focuses on physical signs of a break-in and external threats that proponents believe the Boulder police initially downplayed or ignored because they were so focused on the family.
What's the core evidence for an intruder?
It centers on physical signs and known security lapses at the house. First, there was an unidentified boot mark found in the basement room where JonBenét's body was located, a mark that didn't match any shoes owned by the Ramsey family.
Okay, an unknown boot print. What else?
The unsecured entry points. Sources confirmed that on the night of the murder, at least 2 windows were left a bit open for Christmas light cords. There was also at least 1 unlocked door. And, significantly, that broken basement window.
The one John Ramsey had broken previously when he got locked out.
Yes, that same window. Located in the basement near where the body was found. These points offered multiple potential ways for an outsider to get in.
And Detective Lou Smith, he was the main proponent of this theory.
He was. Lou Smith was a very experienced homicide detective who came out of retirement to help the DA's office with this case in early '97. He became convinced the police were wrong about the Ramseys. He resigned in 1998 because he felt the investigation was mishandling the intruder evidence. His specific theory was that an intruder got in through that break-in basement window.
And Smith also believed a stun gun was used.
Yes, he pointed to marks on JonBenét's body seen in autopsy photos, which he interpreted as consistent with a stun gun being used to subdue her. This idea was also supported by former FBI profiler John Douglas, who consulted for the Ramseys. Smith thought the intruder might have planned to use a suitcase found near that window, maybe for the kidnapping or to remove the body, but something went wrong. Maybe the accidental blow to the head occurred, followed by the strangulation.
But wasn't there a big problem with the broken window theory? The cobweb?
Ah, yes, the cobweb. That's the major counterpoint. Critics of the intruder via basement window theory point out that crime scene photos showed an apparently intact cobweb spanning part of the broken window frame. There were also undisturbed cobwebs reported on the window, well, great outside, and on the foliage nearby. The argument is, how could someone climb through without breaking those delicate webs?
So that cobweb directly contradicts the idea of entry through that specific window. It's a real paradox.
It is an unidentified boot mark inside, near the window, but an undisturbed cobweb in the window itself. It's one of those fundamental conflicts in the physical evidence.
Were there other factors that supported the intruder idea beyond the state of the house itself?
Yes, proponents point to the broader context. The Ramsey's neighborhood, Boulder, had seen a spike in burglaries over 100 in the months leading up to the murder.
So a generally higher risk environment than perhaps assumed.
Exactly. And furthermore, records showed there were 38 registered sex offenders living within just a 2-mile radius of the Ramsey home. This established that potential external threats were certainly present in the vicinity.
Did Detective Smith ever identify specific potential intruders?
He did investigate several individuals. One name that became public was Gary Howard Oliva, a registered sex offender. Smith's team identified as a person of interest back in 2002. Oliva was later arrested in 2016 on unrelated child exploitation charges. Sources mention he had some kind of obsession with JonBenét and allegedly made claims about being with her around the time she died.
And the intruder theory got a boost in court too, didn't it, in that libel case?
It did, significantly. In 2003, in the Wolf v. Ramsey libel suit, where the Ramseys sued an author who implicated them, federal judge Julie Carnes issued a ruling. She concluded, based on the evidence presented in that civil case, that the evidence was actually more consistent with the theory that an intruder murdered JonBenét than it was with the theory that Mrs. Ramsey did. She stated there was virtually no evidence to support the theory that Patsy had murdered her daughter.
Now, that was a civil case, so a lower burden of proof, a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond reasonable doubt. But still, a federal judge finding the intruder theory more plausible, that carried weight.
Absolutely. It heavily influenced the public perception and provided significant legal backing for the family's position.
Okay, let's move into the DNA evidence. This seems to be where the case takes another major and very controversial turn.
Definitely. If the ransom note and the crime scene handling created the initial doubt about the family, the DNA evidence, emerging years later, presented a powerful challenge to that narrative. It fundamentally shifted the conversation.
So what was the key DNA finding?
The first major development came in late 2003, almost 7 years after the murder. Forensic investigators managed to extract enough material from a mixed blood sample found on JonBenét's underwear. From this, they established a partial DNA profile. It belonged to an unknown male. And crucially, this profile excluded John, Patsy, Burke, and JonBenét's known half-siblings.
An unknown male profile, not matching the family. Was it run through databases?
Yes, it was submitted to the FBI's CODIS database, the national database containing profiles from convicted offenders and crime scenes, but it produced no match, no hits.
And this finding led to the exoneration by the new DA.
It did, but not immediately. Mary Lacy took over as district attorney in 2002, and sources indicate she was already leaning towards the intruder theory. Then, in July 2008, citing advancements in DNA technology, specifically touch DNA analysis, allegedly performed on the waistband of JonBenét's long johns, which matched the profile from the underwear. Lacy took a very public, very controversial step. She officially exonerated the Ramsey family. She sent them a formal letter of apology and declared them completely cleared based on this unknown male DNA evidence. She stated this DNA belonged to the perpetrator.
That must have caused a huge reaction, especially from the original investigators.
Oh, absolutely. There was significant backlash. Mark Beckner, the former Boulder police chief who led the initial investigation, publicly disagreed strongly in 2015. He called the exoneration absurd, saying you can't exonerate someone based on a tiny piece of DNA that hasn't even been definitively linked to the commission of the crime itself.
So Beckner believed the DNA was important, but didn't prove the Ramseys were innocent.
Exactly. He maintained the unknown DNA had to be the focus. Finding who it belonged to was key, but publicly clearing the family based solely on its presence was premature and, in his view, irresponsible.
And the DNA evidence itself got more complicated later on.
It did. In 2016, new forensic analysis reported by news outlets citing investigative sources suggested the original DNA sample might actually contain genetic markers from 2 unknown individuals, not just one.
2 people. How does that change things?
Well, a mixed profile makes things much murkier. It increases the possibility that the DNA isn't from a single killer, but could be the result of innocent transfer or contamination from multiple sources, which, given how badly contaminated the scene was.
Right, that brings us back to the central debate about trace DNA, doesn't it? What does it actually mean in a compromised scene?
Precisely. You have experts on both sides. Forensic pathologist Michael Baden argued you can't rely on it solely. He said, trace amounts of DNA can get on places and clothing from all different non-suspicious means. He felt there was no forensic proof it pointed to a stranger murder, suggesting it could easily be contamination, maybe from manufacturing, handling, or even someone who touched the body or clothes during the chaos of the discovery.
But others strongly disagree.
Yes. Former FBI profiler Candice DeLong argued the opposite. She believed that because the same DNA profile was found in multiple locations on JonBenét's clothing, it was less likely to be random contamination. Her view was that the consistency pointed to a single source, the perpetrator, making the intruder theory more likely. The identical profile in different spots suggested direct contact by the killer.
And there were even reports of disagreement within the DA's office about Lacey's exoneration.
A former investigator from her office, Gordon Coombs, later stated that DA Lacey was very strongly biased towards the intruder theory. He claimed he felt discouraged from voicing any opposition or alternative views. This suggests there might have been internal pressure to reach the conclusion that cleared the Ramseys, potentially affecting the objectivity of that 2008 decision.
We also need to touch on that bizarre incident in 2006, the John Mark Carr confession.
Ah, yes. That was a major media event for a short time. Carr, an American schoolteacher, was arrested in Thailand. He had confessed, apparently in emails, to a professor studying the case, to drugging, sexually assaulting, and accidentally killing JonBenét.
For a moment, it seemed like the case might finally be solved.
He did. The news exploded. But the confession fell apart very quickly under scrutiny.
How so?
Well, Carr only provided details that were already widely known from media reports. He got key forensic facts wrong. For instance, he claimed he drugged JonBenét, but the autopsy confirmed there were no drugs in her system.
And crucially, his DNA didn't match.
Exactly. His DNA did not match the unknown male profile found on JonBenét's clothing. That was definitive. He was never charged in connection with her death. The whole Carr episode really highlights the danger of false confessions and the power of DNA to debunk them.
So, after all this, what's the legal aftermath been like beyond the criminal investigation itself?
The legal aftermath has been significant, primarily characterized by the Ramsey family's use of defamation lawsuits to challenge media portrayals and publications that implicated them, especially after the DA's exoneration. Their attorney, L. Lynn Wood, became very well known for pursuing these cases aggressively.
They sued several outlets.
Yes. Sources mention suits against Star magazine and also against the authors and publishers of a book titled JonBenét, inside the Ramsey murder investigation. Many of these ended in out-of-court settlements.
Which often means the publisher decides it's less risky or costly to settle than to fight it in court, especially given that 2003 federal ruling that favored the intruder theory.
Precisely. Settlements often included apologies or retractions from the media outlets.
And Burke Ramsey also sued recently over that 2016 TV program.
He did. After the CBS documentary aired, the one theorizing he was involved, Burke filed massive lawsuits against both CBS and one of the program's key experts, forensic pathologist Werner Spitz. He sought hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. Those suits were also eventually settled out of court in 2019. Again, no public trial, but it showed the family's ongoing determination to fight narratives pointing to their involvement.
So, despite the exoneration, the settlements, the ongoing debate, where does the actual homicide investigation stand today?
Officially, the case remains an active, open homicide investigation with the Boulder Police Department. It's classified as a cold case, but they maintain it's not closed.
And they're still working on it?
Apparently so. In 2016, the Boulder Police Chief, Greg Testa, gave some sense of the scale. He reported the department had processed over 1,500 pieces of evidence over the years, analyzed more than 200 separate DNA samples, and looked into over 20,000 tips, leads, emails, and letters received since 1996. It's a huge volume of information.
So after all this time, nearly 3 decades, we're still left with these two fundamentally opposing stories, aren't we?
We really are. You have the narrative of a staged family crime that's supported by things like the bizarre ransom note written on house paper, the initial police observations of no forced entry, the garrote made from household items, the statistical probability, and the procedural chaos in those first hours.
And then you have the intruder crime narrative, supported by that unidentified male DNA found on her clothes, the confirmed unsecured doors and windows, the unknown boot print in the basement, the context of burglaries and sex offenders nearby, and that federal judge's conclusion in the libel case. The DNA, however complex and debated, remains the strongest piece of physical evidence pointing away from the family.
And the whole thing is just permanently clouded by those initial mistakes, isn't it? The contamination of the crime scene in those first 7 hours. That failure means the argument over the DNA is a killer's trace definitively clearing the family, or is it just random contamination in the chaotic scene? That argument becomes almost impossible to resolve with certainty based on the existing evidence. And it dictates whether investigators should be looking for a complex family cover-up or a ghost-like intruder who benefited from those early errors.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, building on everything we've discussed from the sources. Considering those critical early investigative failures and this persistent, ongoing scientific argument about the trace DNA, whether it's exonerating or just noise, if we could go back to December 1996, armed with today's technology, things like rapid DNA sequencing right at the scene or advanced forensic genealogy, what single investigative step beyond the obvious need to properly secure the entire house immediately might have been the most crucial? What could have definitively answered the question of who that unknown male DNA belonged to, and perhaps finally brought some measure of closure to this tragic case?